you make it to 2003, it's like you turn on the radio, you have rock radio, which is going to be like a lot of new metal, a lot of like post grunge type stuff, maybe a bunch of Nickelback and Creed, whatever. Like my mom probably should have gave Nickelback more of a shot.
They were not as bad as their
did
stereotype.
you see the documentary on Netflix about them?
Yes.
They chose to like really tackle the corniness thing head on.
No, of course, because they saw branding early as so important.
Yeah.
You know, which is like fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Because I just learned about branding like yesterday.
Really?
I'm still trying to like figure it out.
So you think their brand was the problem?
Yeah, well, they were picking a niche. Like they specifically, and I know like musicians are ahead on that way more than comedians or even podcasters were. Like they recognize that they have to have a look. Rappers have to have a look. It's almost like acting, right? So Nickelback choosing to go down that Applebee's route was really, really conscious. And yeah, I don't know. I find the ability to be able to just change what you do for the market. You can call it being a sellout or a hack, but it's actually like, that's a talent,
right?
You know,
if you're a funny dude and you just want to do a podcast, like I have a friend, Ryan Palmo, who does like a porn podcast, and he's like a funny up and coming comedian dude. And he just kind of realized like, oh, there's not that many podcasts in the porn world. I'm going to make my podcast about all these porn stars. And it gives him an opportunity to be funny on camera and to make some good content, even though he's not like originally from the porn world. I think he actually dated a porn girl, and that kind of like led him into it. But that to me is smart. It's like, you know, pick a niche, even if it's not like your home niche, because your home niche might just be like comedy in general, and that's a little too big at this point. I think.
You can go make your own after you're on and you're paid. Go do whatever you want. Go do your passion project, but you got to get the money first. And I've always been conscious of that. You know,
but were you like me in the sense that you were like a young dude who just really wanted to make money, wanted to live well without having to have a full-time job?
Absolutely.
I heard Andrew saying that too, where he's like, so you were very ambitious and intelligent, but you just didn't have like the work ethic to want to be a worker bee.
Lazy,
I 1000% relate to that.
Well, I wasn't spoiled, but I was lazy, you know, and I just was like, how can I get out of the rat race? Before I even like knew what a rat race was, I was like, oh, having a job, like Malcolm X called a job having a slave. I got a slave. That's how like black guys from the street would talk in like the 40s. I was like, oh my God, that's so true. Like I have to figure out how to get up out of this world.
Right.
And so, yeah, and every kid from the early 2000s, the 90s was selling weed. So obviously I'm from Portland, Oregon, and the weed rush, the illegal weed rush, you know, of the early 2000s, I liken that to what crack was for black guys in the 80s.
It's just this huge opportunity for anybody who was in the know to make a lot more money than you could conceivably make doing like anything else.
It was kind of like a gift from God in a way. It was like this 10-year just being in the right place at the right time in history. And we would hear about, you know, and I'm selling like ounces, you know, nickels and dime bags and shit. And we would hear about like older brothers of our friends that we hung out with in high school who were like who were like really like making a living from selling weed. And I was fascinated by that. I was like, I have to figure out how they do this. Like how does an underground market work? Like how do the buyers meet the sellers? How do you buy it at a low enough price to where you can mark it up and move it in bulk quickly? So that's what I spent like the first 6 years in the game figuring out. Like I did not come up quickly. Like it was like a startup company for a long time before we took like real profit.
And in the Northwest, it's just hard to understate how much of a cultural thing it was for just a random young dude to just have huge amounts of weed. Because I remember I'm from the East Coast. I grew up in New Hampshire. I moved to New York when I'm like 20, and I'm out there for 7 years. And like towards the end of my time in New York, I started traveling back and forth to the West Coast. I remember when I first go to San Francisco and we're staying in this BMX house full of dudes who ride BMX bikes all day, and that's mainly their like passion. Maybe some of them go to school and shit. And at a certain point, I realized like every single one of these dudes has multiple pounds of weed under their bed. And are just out here moving it. And that was the first time there was this dude D-Block, who's like a San Francisco legend, and he told me like, yeah, this is my park. I hang out here every day. I sell weed. And I'm like, the cops don't just pull up and just arrest you? He's like, hell no. He's like, I'm selling this shit to corporate dudes who work for their programmers and shit. Like, why would the cops want to involve themselves? If somebody gets beat up or killed over here, then for sure the cops are going to want to get involved. But as long as we keep shit cool, they're not worried about it. I'm coming from New York, where it's like any crime. Like if you're drinking a beer in a brown bag, you could expect that at some point the cops are going to lurk up on you and and get you
they had
for
like
anything.
undercover like vice squads back in the 2000s and the 90s that would bust like small time pot dealers in Columbus Circle or whatever. They never had that on the West Coast.
They're probably still doing that right now. They're still like busting people for all kinds of shit. When I decided I never wanted to be a criminal in New York was when I saw a UPS van pull up and then the lights turn on and it's like an undercover operation being operated out of the van. And I'm like, I could never anticipate that. So you've officially scared me into never committing any kind of criminal offense out here.
Dude, New York, there's so much surveillance and law enforcement. I don't know how these kids are still running around shooting each other.
Yeah.
I'm like, to get away with murder in New York, like
Insane.
you have to be just lucky as you know?
Totally. And yeah, usually when somebody gets shot, there's like basically a major motion picture that can be constructed out of all the security camera footage and everything.
If they wanted to, they could track if somebody left his house in the Bronx and took the train down to Harlem to go shoot somebody.
Right.
And then after that, jumped on a train and went to Brooklyn. You could almost, if you had enough manpower, watch him on camera from the time that he got on the train in the Bronx all the way to Brooklyn. It's crazy.
They did that big time when FBG Doug got killed because they were able to have footage of the dudes in O Block running down the stairs to go get in their cars, footage of them getting in the cars, and then I think they had like 300 different camera angles from the highway proving that was their cars on the highway going to downtown Chicago to go kill their enemy.
Right.
And they were just able to construct it in a way that it's like, how could you ever possibly have hoped to get away with this? And the truth is that a lot of the murders that are happening in Chicago, they don't catch them because they're committed in areas where this shit is probably barely even investigated, but they get like a popular rapper in a very popular area outside a designer store and boom, they show you what they're capable of.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you want to commit a murder nowadays in a big American city, you got to have your shit together.
Yeah.
If you want to really get away with it, you got to have fake license plates, stolen cars, a hitter not from America. You know what I mean?
Wait, what's the non-American hitter going to do?
Oh, you bring him up. Well, you bring him up. Like literally, I saw a guy. I was coming back from Mexico, and I saw this. Like he was like a street kid. You know what I mean? Like tattooed teardrops. Didn't look like he had a bank account, but he's sitting first class, right? He had sweatpants on. He's got the LA Dodger, gangbanger.
That's what I want people to think of me when they see me in first class. I want them to think like, oh, he's a menace.
Yeah,
he must have got here through some illegal means. Yeah.
So I mean, podcasting, this shit basically is illegal. I mean, it's a lot of work,
Renegade
but
art form,
it seems like free money sometimes. But I was like, oh, he's getting flown in. He's a guy with dual citizenship. He's getting flown in to do some wet work for the day. Nobody knows who he is. There's no file on him. He, does his work, and then they put him on a plane, and he's back in a safe house before they even identify the body.
I wish that some of the killers that I've had on this podcast would think so far ahead to have like an immigrant come and handle something for them. That might have helped some of them out in a certain situation.
We need immigrants, dude. Yeah. They do the jobs we don't want to do.
No, that's real. No, there's a Chicago rapper who just got killed. He was only like 18. He allegedly had 10 bodies. And this kid, Bloodhound Lil Jeff, and like it's rumored that he might have been going from Chicago to Milwaukee and like doing hits out there, and that was like a crazy concept that two different gangs in different states might have been actually like swapping out, like you come here and you get my enemy, I'll go there and get your enemy.
Wow.
That way it'll be harder for the cops to put together.
Yeah, I mean, it does with, I don't know about street gangs, that is fascinating though. I can tell you with cartels, the politics are that intricate. Like we had a guy on who was a big time, he was basically like the logistics for all of the weed smuggling in the Northeast. He was based in like upstate New York, one of these just white boys, you know how it is, one of these just country dudes, but he would help the mafia, the Sicilian mafia out of Montreal, move all of their work like across the country. We're talking like tons. You can't even count how many tons of weed this guy, and he would dispatch truck drivers and shit. But if they needed somebody hit, the Canadian mob in the US, this guy owned a bunch of land on the border. They would like sneak in these hitters like they were Mexicans crossing illegally. So that's how they get through. They don't have to go through checkpoints, anything like that.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was fascinating.
That's insane.
I'm learning so much from this podcast, dude.
This one. So
no, from my own podcast.
Oh, from your own, yeah.
This one too, though.
wait, okay, so you're selling weed for how long before you actually, because you kind of cross like a barrier that like nobody I know seems like they've ever crossed, or at least they haven't admitted it, which is basically like you get to a certain point with selling weed that you have to take it to the level of getting it from the cartel. I don't know anybody who's crossed over that line.
Well, a lot of it was just chance, and me taking the opportunity, you know. So I think it was like 2007 when we first got plugged with some growers in Southern Oregon, which is where all the weed from that era, all the outdoor weed in the country was basically grown 5 hours south of where I live, right? And then Northern California, Humboldt, Mendocino, we all know this. So I first got plugged with some like, I called them the rednecks, right? These are like unemployed, you know, blue collar white guys that would, you know, have like small grows, maybe like 300 or 400 plants, and their neighbor would have 300 or 400, and they would coddle together and, you know, maybe have like 1,000 pounds a season, right?
Right.
Which is enough to make like a middle class living, but I needed more than that. But I had a pretty good wholesale price. I would get pounds for like, you know, 24 or 25. But when you go further into California, and it was 2008 when I first met the Mexican plug. Now my price per unit is down to like 2,000, maybe 21, and I'm selling it on the East Coast for, you know, 35, 36, and I'm selling 20 at a time.
Right.
So now you got $1 million.
And are those prices deflated a bit at this point because there's so much more competition?
Incredibly, I think.
Okay, I went through a short phase where we were like shipping little 10 packs back to the East Coast and shit, and it's like very quickly it started to become the customer is more discerning than I planned on them being, and the customer wants it at a better price than I'm really expecting to do, where we were making like 1,000 off each one, and this seems like the best idea ever. Oh, we ship one package and we make 10 grand off it, and then like kind of quickly it became like, oh, they care a lot more about the quality of the weed, and you might only be making 250 off each one or something.
Yeah, they kind of can name their price almost.
It's kind of inevitable, especially when you don't have the most direct connection to people out there. You just have like one guy who's sort of passing it along for you and shit.
Yeah. So I tried to always keep like 3 buying groups in the mix, but this was before I got super flooded, like before the East Coast got flooded by West Coast weed. Right. This is like pre it even being legal in California, Oregon, Washington.
The glory days back then.
The glory days. But I knew it. And I told my partner, I was like, we're going to be extinct in 5 years, so we got to hit it now. This is like the greatest of times. So it was just through circumstance, and we saw it getting harder to move the work wholesale in Oregon because it's already so flooded. So like I could move 20 pounds a week, and after, you know, breaking off my partner and the drivers, I got like $2,000 for moving 20 pounds. You know what I mean?
Yikes.
So it's we were getting squeezed, and then I just through a connection, a buddy of mine, I met these mobbed up kids in the Philadelphia area, Philadelphia, South Jersey, and these were like kids of their parents were mobsters. They were like spoiled private school kids. They're all on pills and shit, but they're big time. They're selling tons of weed. And back then, an East Coast weed dealer, their whole goal was to find a West Coast connect. So when they met me, it was go time.
Right.
And that's what changed everything.
Yeah, no. 100%.
You know, that's what took us from making 50 grand a year to making, you know, $2.5 million.
And I heard you saying it's kind of crazy how it used to be secretive when you had a plug on the West Coast. Like it was a little bit difficult to come by. Now we live in the age where a guy who's got a bunch of trap money will get a top rapper and pay them $50,000 or $100,000 to do a 60-second video where they're holding up your pound bag and talking into the camera and basically saying, hey, fuck with my boys at Bay Smokes or whatever it is. And it's like that now has taken place of that, because like what are they really trying to do by buying those ads? Like where can you buy that shit? It's like literally they're trying to make connects for trapper stuff.
Of course. Yeah, it's crazy how much money they'll pay just to make $100 off flipping a pound.
Yeah.